Well, welcome everybody. This is the first edition of Composers at Home, Maybe Drinking Coffee, episode number 1. And it is my great pleasure to host for you this show and bring my friend Tony Lanman, who will talk a little bit about his music and some processes and answer questions, and who knows where things will go. So I will bring in Tony now to join us. And there is Tony. So,
Hey,
hi. So how are you, Tony?
I'm awesome, man. Thank you for having me on the inaugural episode. This is cool.
Yeah, this
Really
is
cool.
this is an idea that I hatched at the kind of at the drop of a hat. I thought, oh, it'd be fun to talk about music with my friends and different composers, and why not do it live? You know, we spend a lot of time talking about things when we are not live, so why don't we do it in a public forum? Um, and You're the first person I thought of. First of all, I think there may be people who don't know who you are and kind of your backstory. I do, but we can talk about how we met maybe as part of that. So, where I know where you're from, but why don't you tell the studio audience, as it were, where you're from and how did you get, very quickly, how did you get to this point where you are now?
How quickly?
Well, because we're going to dive into some of that. We're going to
Yeah,
talk a
yeah,
little.
for sure. Well, yeah, I'm originally from Spring, Texas, which is a suburb kind of north of Houston, Texas. And I was, I grew up there, was raised there, and didn't leave there until I was 23 when I went to Austin to go to the University of Texas to study music.
And when was that, Tony? What years were you at UT?
I was there from 96 to 2000.
Okay, great. And was it right after that you went straight to grad school, or did you take some time off?
No, no, I went straight from there to Bloomington, Indiana, to Indiana University and did my master's and doctorate.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And you graduated in which year?
I finished my doctorate in, I think everything was said and done in 2008.
Right. I sort of remember, but it's been a little while, so I couldn't remember the exact year that you had finished your PhD. Or was it a DMA or PhD?
The
A
DMA
DMA, right?
in that program.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I met Tony in 2001. We had a little bit of an adventure together in Prague. So, of which many stories. We could tell many stories. Some of which are not appropriate for public consumption, but but we had fun, and it was November of 2001
Yeah.
that we met, and in fact, the piece that we'll be presenting tonight is a piece that was performed and recorded in Prague when I met Tony, a piece that I know very well because I was at the session. Um, so I'll probably ask this of most people that I have on, but what led you to becoming a composer? And where was your musical passion when you were younger? Um,
Well, I played guitar. I started playing guitar when I was 11. And I started playing guitar because of Eddie Van Halen.
mhm.
And, I heard Eddie Van Halen play, and I wanted to play that too. So I started, you know, playing guitar and trying to play rock. And when I was in high school, I was, really into progressive music and metal. music, and this was the 80s, late 80s, when I was in high school. So I graduated in 91. So yeah, late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're talking about Metallica and
Right.
Megadeth and stuff like
Right.
that.
Right.
But also I was a crazy Rush fan, and I liked a lot of the 70s prog bands,
Mm-hmm.
Yes and King Crimson and, uh, you know, et cetera, those kind of bands. And I think those bands kind of introduced me to a little more advanced musical concepts, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, and odd time signatures and rhythms and just some a little more advanced sort of things musically.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a band, and we toured around that region, um, and we were sort of a heavy progressive kind of band. And I at that time I started listening to more classical music and sort of tried my hand at trying to write some things, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I didn't know anyone who knew what they were doing
Mm-hmm.
in that realm, and I was just doing it. I was teaching myself to read music and write it, and I remember I had this program. It was like a very, very early music notation program, and I cannot remember the name of it. It was on an Amiga. I had a Commodore
Oh.
Amiga, and
Uh, I think it was like it wasn't Deluxe Music Construction Set, was it?
oh, it might have been. Yeah, it might have been that. But I started, putting things rudimentarily into that, and it would play it back. And so I wrote some pieces, and I realized, this is really amazing, and I want to continue to pursue this and learn about it. But I realized I, I just wasn't in that world at all. I didn't even have a toe in that world.
Yeah.
I didn't know anyone that I could turn to, or anyone that I could talk to about it, anyone that I could show a score to.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized I would have to go to music school to continue learning about it. And that's sort of a funny story. So I started college like right after high school, and I went to the University of Houston. And I was studying like communications because I really wanted to be a music major, but it was just out of my realm, you know. And after 4.5 semesters, I was pretty much like, yeah, I'm sick of this. I want to be a music major. I don't want to do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I pretty much made that decision like in the middle of class one day. And I literally, this is what happened. I got out of that class in the afternoon. I walked down to the main administration building. I dropped all my classes, and then I walked over to the music building, and I went
Mm-hmm.
into the office and sat down at the secretary's desk, and she says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to be a music major." And she was like, okay, well, what do you want to major in? And I said, I want to be a composer. She's like, okay, what do you play? I said, well, I play guitar. And she said, we don't have guitar at this school, and undergraduates have to major in their instrument. So then I was in I
Yeah.
was young and dumb and impulsive, and I was all of a sudden in this spot like, what did I just do, and what do I do now?
Mm-hmm.
And so that started a whole journey that, to try to make it as short as possible. Started studying with a guy named Mark Garvin. Started studying classical guitar with a guy in Houston named Mark Garvin, because I found out that I would have to audition on classical guitar to get into the University of Texas. I'd never even touched a classical guitar, and then I studied for 9 months, and by some miracle, I passed the audition, and like a year later, I was in Austin. So it was crazy.
So pretty short span of time that all of this sort of life curve happened, right?
Very short.
Yeah.
very,
Right.
very, very short. And what happened was, when I got to Texas, I didn't know, I was so far behind everyone else as far as really everything,
Mm-hmm.
music theory knowledge, and my knowledge of the repertoire was really just bad, just very limited.
Yeah.
I didn't really know a lot of repertoire, so I had you know, a lot of catching up to do when I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was also like, the first time in my life that I'd been in a place where, uh, I could actually really talk to people,
Yeah.
and
Right.
it was a really freeing experience. Yeah.
Right. Right. You were surrounded by like-minded people
Yes.
in a, who ate and slept and breathed music in that environment, which was it's very stimulating for me as I remember my undergraduate at New England. And I can only imagine switching from something like communications and going into music, and suddenly it's like, wow, there's a lot of people that actually think kind of the way I do. I mean, despite whatever, as you pointed out, like, that you had a lot of catching up to do, but still, you were hungry. And,
Yes, very much so.
you know,
I mean, I was trying to kind of prove to everybody and myself that, I belonged in this place with all these other people.
mm, mm-hmm,
Um, and it was amazing, just to walk down the hall and hear all this music, all this incredible music coming out of all these practice rooms. And I was just like, I can't believe I'm here. It's just,
mm-hmm.
yeah, it was
Right.
amazing.
Kind of like, whoa, well, how did this happen? Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, what were, uh, as you made your detour, and as you mentioned, your steady diet of good rock, classic rock, heavy metal, and I use that term. I mean, I easily throw that term around because there's good and bad rock, and everybody you mentioned is good rock. But so you already had good musical taste going in. So what were some of your first influences in the kind of the canonical classical tradition? Um, what music drew? What were some of the sounds and pieces that sort of drew you in, spoke to you?
Yeah. So the first classical album that I ever bought, um, was because of an album from a band called Faith No More. You remember Faith No
Hmm.
More from the
Hmm.
90s?
Mm-hmm.
And they had this song where they sampled, um, little bits from Shostakovich's Eighth String Quartet.
Oh. Okay.
And I heard these sounds and I thought, whoa, that's really cool. I went and looked in the liner notes, and it said it was sampled from an album by the Kronos Quartet called Black Angels.
Oh.
And you know, a Kronos Quartet sounded cool to me. I didn't know who they were,
Right.
but I went to the record store and bought that album, and I was just blown away by it, just like nothing I'd ever heard before.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that Shostakovich, and I still do to this day. And so I started listening to string quartets. Just I don't know. This was a thing that I heard, and so I started listening to Bartok string quartets,
Mm-hmm.
and then to more traditional string quartets. I was listening to Mozart string quartets and Beethoven, and that's really the first thing that sort of
Right.
put me on that path. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
What did you have any? What was your? How did you approach listening to, say, classical, say Mozart, versus how you might have, say, absorbed Bartok? Did you? How aware were you about how different that language was when you started to listen to music, which is fairly disparate sonically, although a lot of commonality too, but still
Right, right,
pretty
right.
wide, right?
Yeah.
Range.
Yeah, it's weird, because I kind of got hit with all of it at the same time.
Mm,
And I obviously was aware that it was different languages. One thing that really helped me early on was I had bought this book. Um, it it was just called Classical Music.
There's a title for you.
Yeah, classical music. And it was, I'm trying to remember who the author was, but I still have it. It is, but despite the title, it is a unbelievably fantastic book. It's something that's long out of print, but it was basically like a music history book for, you know, for regular people, I guess. But it went through, you know, every period of classical music. It touched on, you know, all the major composers and a lot of really minor composers too. And I was fascinated by that book. I read that book cover to, before I even went to music school. I had read that cover to cover like 8 times.
Wow.
And so I aced my music history classes because I pretty much had already knew all this stuff. I had already read it, you know, over and over and over again. And so I would read about these composers in this book. And so that, I mean, that book led me to go seek out like Perrotin. It's like, whoa, you know, who's Perrotin? And,
Right.
and I would read about him in this book, and it sounded interesting. And so, and that's what I was really drawn to. I was drawn to things that were really new or newer, you know, 20th century or later, and things that were really old, you know, like 16th century and earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. One of the first conversations I ever had with Steve Reich was about musical influences, and he said more or less the same thing. He said he was really interested in music from, say, Debussy onwards, especially jazz, and anything from, say, 1600 and earlier, 1620 and earlier, right? Renaissance, medieval music. And he, you know, he found the stuff in the middle kind of like, it's okay. Which I found really interesting because I also have the same feeling. It's not that I don't like Mozart or whatever. I mean, that's a whole other subject, but I find a lot of that music to be not as interesting, of course, as the music of the 20th century and beyond, and jazz, and also that of earlier music, which I find to be really interesting. So I think it's fascinating that you also were drawn to those two sides.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny, like, because I spent so much time like with those two periods. When I went to Indiana University, you know, they gave, you know, they gave us placement tests and things like that, and they gave 2 music history exams, you know, for graduate school, and they were both really heavily focused on early music and then new music, and I believe they were just designed to make people fail, because there was pretty much nothing, you know, about the classical period and romantic period. And I thought, man, if they would have made this test about, you know, Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms, I would have failed it totally.
Remedial city for you.
Yeah, but I aced this test, and like everybody else failed it, you know. But yeah, I just thought that was funny. I was like, this test is written for me. It's like, it's crazy.
Right. And that doesn't happen very often when those tests are kind of like, oh, I know the answers, especially those entrance tests. So, all right. So here we are. You are finished up with your undergrad, and you've established your course as a composer. I think before we leave your undergrad and before we get into grad and we listen to a piece that would be contemporaneous with that transition, when did you? I find it interesting to find out when a composer writes a piece of music that they feel are really like the first kind of piece that feels like they're saying something they want to say. There's something that comes out musically that's like, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense to me. This is me. Did you have that moment in undergrad? And if so, what piece was it?
Well, actually, you cut out there. I missed most of that question.
Oh, okay. Zoom. Oh, Zoom and the internet. The question actually was, um, what piece was the piece that sort of established your, or that spoke to you, your own music that spoke to you and said, okay, yeah, I'm a composer. This is me. Like the piece that, if you will, put you on the map as a composer for yourself.
Right. Yeah. So this piece that we're going to talk about, I think is that piece. I done a couple in my undergrad that were sort of that way, but not completely. And I think this is the first piece that I was just like, you know, I'm going to do exactly what I want to do. I'm not going to, worry about what I think my teacher wants me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I probably didn't really know at the time, but you know, um, and I'm just going to do what I think sounds cool and put in all my influences in there. And there, yeah, this was definitely that first piece that I felt was 100% my my own voice. So
Okay, great.
yeah,
Um, so you wrote this piece. So do you want to set up this piece a little bit before we hear it?
sure. So this piece is called Il Dolce Stile Nuovo. It's not a pretentious name at all, and
No.
no, and when I was an undergrad, um, I am a guitarist, and I had really no experience with piano. And when I was an undergrad, I was afraid. I mean, I was like deathly afraid to write for piano because their pieces, and I would be like, I'll never be able to write for piano like that. And I was just intimidated by it. And for some reason, I look back, I don't know why I didn't think of it, but I look back and like my professors weren't really pushing me to write for it either. They were just,
Hmm.
kind of letting me, for the most part, do what I wanted. Maybe they never said like, hey, if you want to go to graduate school, you should probably have something for piano, but um, so uh, I was writing this piece. There's a story behind this because I was at the time I was dating this girl, and she was back in Austin, and I was in Bloomington. This was like my first semester in Bloomington in the fall of 2000, and she was a singer, and she also wrote a lot of poetry and stuff. And so I thought, there was one poem of hers that I liked, and I thought, I'm going to surprise her with this. I'm going to like write this, you know, piece for voice and piano on this poem. So I'd written like a minute or so, I don't know. And I was like, oh, I'm just gonna like tell her and see what she thinks.
Hmm.
So I called and I was like, hey, I'm writing this piece on this poem that you wrote, and I'm expecting, oh
Like
man,
just
that's
shower
really good.
you with, yeah,
Sure.
right. Yeah. Right.
And what I got was something really opposite. She was like adamantly like, you don't set that poem. No, no, you cannot set that poem. And she was getting like upset. I was totally like what's going on? And it turns out that I can't really share many details, but it turns
Sure.
out that when I was young in the poem, I just let's just say I misinterpreted the poem like on a huge scale. And
Okay.
I thought it was about one thing. It wasn't. It was, about this other thing. Yeah. And I was like, well, man, what am I going to do with this now? And so a semester went by, went into the spring of 2001, and I said, I got the idea of writing for piano trio. Because at the time, my teacher in Indiana was like, you don't have very many pieces for like
Mm.
standard ensembles.
Hmm.
And, maybe you should write something for string quartet or
Right. Some straightforward kind of
yeah.
grouping, right? Yeah.
You should write something for ensembles that actually exist. So,
Right. Right.
um, so I just I glommed onto to piano trio. I thought it was a really cool combination, and I thought I can use this song in this piece. So basically, what you'll hear in the intro, the first minute or so, when it's just the piano and the cello, this was the original song that I was writing, with the melody line and everything. It was pretty much exactly what you hear. It's just the voice part was, transposed over for cello
Mm-hmm.
in this version.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just kind of went from there, and I wanted to, uh, you know, write a perpetual motion kind of piece that didn't sound like minimalism, even though I love minimalism and I love
Right.
Steve Reich and all that. But
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want it to sound like a Steve Reich clone.
Right. Right.
So that's one thing I wanted to do. I wanted to throw in some like hardcore counterpoint that was more based on like lawsuits, but like you know, lawsuits on crack, right?
Right.
Um, and I wanted to throw in my heavy metal influences in there, and just guitar stuff. And there's like electric guitar
Mm-hmm.
feedback and the violin in the middle and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I just threw in all this stuff that I loved, I thought was cool, and I just went for it, totally. And I was lucky, to get a good recording of it, because this piece is hard as hell.
Yeah.
Um, but I just kind of let loose with this piece. Yeah. Oh, and also it was a challenge. Another thing that made me want to write this piece is somebody told me that because I was not a pianist, I would never be able to really write for piano.
No.
Yeah, they told
Wow.
me they told me I couldn't do it, and that pissed me off.
Right. That's kind of like throwing down the gauntlet, right?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
you'll.
So I was like, yeah, I'll show you, I'll write this piece. So like this was like one of the first things I written for piano.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
it would be a very different thing if somebody came to you. You don't know anything about a double contrabass bassoon or something like this, right? Or like a contrabass clarinet. I'll show
right,
you. All right.
right. Which in that case, if someone said that to me, I'd totally be like, "You're totally right. I
You're
don't know
right.
anything about that."
That's fine. I'm not going to
Even
write a
though
piece.
all I know about them is they sound really cool,
Yeah,
and
they do. They
but
do.
I don't know much about them. But yeah, that was one of the motivating factors. Yeah. So
Great. Well, why don't we hear it? This is from a 2001 recording from Prague, Czech Republic, and we will switch so you at home can see the score, which we just did right now.
so cool.
Which is very cool. So if technology does not conspire against us, we will hear the piece and come back to you in a few minutes. Wow, that was great. I hadn't heard that piece for a while, actually. I mean, I've heard.
Yeah,
I mean,
thanks.
I remember it, but I hadn't heard it for a while. So, so you, so one thing for everybody at home, since obviously everybody's at home, Tony can't see actually what you see. In fact, he can't even see me because of the way that I'm trying to preserve bandwidth. So he's blind. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what's happening. So right now there's a view, and I explained this to Tony. There's a view actually with two of our cameras and then his score, and I'm on the last page right now, and I can sort of flip back to the first page, which I will do. I'll queue up the first page. Okay. So great. I just want to say that I haven't heard this piece since. Well, I heard it a lot when we did the recording, and I heard the final result, and I heard it a few times after. I think when you came, you didn't play this for my students when you came to Indiana when I was teaching there, did you? I can't remember. I know you played another
Hmm,
piece you were working on.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember either, but it's literally been years since I heard the piece, and um, I don't want to say that I've forgotten how good a piece this is, uh, but also maybe I like it more now than I liked it then, and I liked it then. If that makes any sense? You know how
Yeah, yeah.
things change, um, you know, musically over time. So, um, well, how do you feel about before I can talk more about how my impressions of music, and maybe we can also begin to field some questions from our studio audience. We have 6 people currently watching. Um, how does the piece feel to you now? Now it's almost 20 years after its composition.
Yeah. I mean, I still like it after that long. Um, and having hindsight, I really realized what this piece did a lot for me, as a composer,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
just for my confidence as a composer,
Hmm.
and took me in a certain direction. It made me feel comfortable with that direction.
Uh-huh.
Um, and um, like maybe like a couple years after this was recorded in 2001, in 2003, I think it was 2003, I did this summer thing in Arizona with this group called the California Ear Unit.
Oh yeah,
I
right.
don't think, and it was in this amazing place called Arcosanti, Arizona. But in the very first night, when all the composers were there, and the group's pianist and clarinetist and I think percussionist were there, and so all the composers were sort of in this semicircle, and the pianist was going down trying to guess what instrument everybody played. It was sort of like this, get to know everybody session,
Right.
and so she was going down. She was like, and you, and maybe you this, and they would talk about their instrument and stuff. And she got to me. So they were playing this piece, um, and she got to me, and she said, "And you're a pianist." And then she went on, and I was like, "Well, I'm not a pianist." And
You
and
won.
she's like,
Yeah,
"Yeah."
you
She's
got.
like, "You're not," and I'm like, "No, I'm a guitarist." I'm like, "I'm a terrible pianist." And she's like, "Huh, because your music is so pianistic. I thought you were a pianist." And that I was like, oh, like it was the greatest compliment like I ever. Like I just felt so
Yeah,
vindicated,
yeah,
by that.
yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
I thought it was because your story before playing the piece, about the person that said, uh, what was the quote? You'll never be able to write well for piano because you're not a
Yeah,
pianist.
he was like, yeah, he's like, you'll never really be able to write for piano.
So did
That
you?
was it.
You should have recorded the compliment and said, "Oh, you send it to that." I would use a colorful metaphor to
Right.
describe this particular person. So, but anyway, nonetheless, I mean, it was one of those probably moments of like, okay, yeah, like, which is great. I think the piano writing is very good. I mean, it's excellent,
Thanks.
and it was it was it Miroslav Sakara that played it? I can't remember who
No,
the.
no, no, no. It was a guy named
Oh,
Jan Petter.
yes, yes, I remember now. Yeah.
Yeah, on that big Petrov
Yes, at Studio
extended
Martinek.
range piano. Yeah,
Yeah, like a
yeah,
9 foot piano, right? It's still there, by the way. Um,
yeah, yeah. How are they going to get it out? Like it was ginormous.
yeah.
Like, yeah, we should talk about that recording space because that was a trip. Like it was this, I don't know, this old ballroom, maybe like
Yeah,
18th
I'll.
century ballroom.
Yeah, I'm gonna let's talk. We'll talk about actually.
Okay,
We'll
okay,
talk
yeah.
anecdotally about that time. But I want to talk about a little bit about the music also, um, and then I want to open it up to if there are any questions. There's a little bit of there's probably about a 10-second delay from when Tony and I say things and when the Facebook audience actually hears them. So I'm not sure how that's going to do for real time.
Yeah,
It doesn't.
yeah.
I don't think this works as well as maybe the Facebook or the YouTube, which might be more instant. I'm not sure, but so I guess one of the things that I probably will ask in this course of these episodes, in addition to hearing a piece by a composer, would be, well, one, why did you choose this piece to exhibit tonight? It is almost a 20-year-old piece, and I know you've written a lot of other music since then. And I think you might have answered it in my earlier question. And then the second is, if, and I hate these questions, but I'm the person that gets to ask them. It's kind of the desert island, you pick 5 records that you're going to take to a desert island or, whatever.
Right.
This is one of those questions. The question is, if you had only, 2 minutes or 90 seconds of time, of which this piece is about a 10-minute piece, what part of this piece would you play somebody that, and why? And what would, so I don't know which one you want to answer first, but I'll put those two out there on the table.
Yeah, so I chose this piece, and we talk about this all the time on my podcast, where I ask people to choose one piece.
Right. So you did
here I had
it.
to
You
do
did it
it.
to me. So haha.
I know, and it is tough. I mean, because
Right.
this is that like breakthrough kind of piece, but then there's the more recent pieces that are more seasoned, more mature. I
Mm.
think a lot of people these days know me musically, like maybe know me more for doing a lot of electric guitar stuff,
Right.
but which obviously this isn't. This is a very traditional ensemble,
Mm.
but I chose it just to sort of share that pivotal moment, I guess, in my creative life,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of where it led me, and yeah, this was a big piece for me, and that's kind of why I chose it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as 90 seconds of the piece, or like what would I choose? That's also tough.
Of course.
I mean, I think if I was out to grab people's attention and like pique their interest, so they would want to hear more, I would probably play them like the last 90 seconds
Okay.
of the piece.
Okay.
But I could also make a case for like the first 90 seconds too, because that's where it started and where all the material comes from and stuff like that. So
Right. So I'm flipping pages here on the PDF. And by the way, I was thinking about this as I was flipping pages during the recording, and this felt an awful lot like acting as a page turner, and I actually got nervous, like I those moments of like, oh shit, what if I miscounted and I spaced out and I don't, and I got to turn the page. I felt that same anxiety, and we've all been, well, maybe not all of us, but if you've lived long enough as a musician, you've been pushed into service as a page turner.
Yeah. Oh, I have. Yeah.
Oh man, and those times, and then you think that you're going to grab too many pages, and At least it's not that. I just push arrow. I push the left and right
Right.
buttons. But anyway, I'm on the last page right now, and I would say that your last 90 seconds begins with well, somewhere around the when you start to open the space up and the gradually pushing towards silence, right? Leading up to that.
Yes, leading up to that, and yeah, right.
Yeah. And that's a really beautiful, beautiful moment.
Thanks.
When that it kind of is like it reminds me of kind of uh, the sun setting, but it hasn't really completely set, and you kind of get you get those sort of gold red hues, and then the hues
Mm.
start to color and they change and they become that deep violet
Oh man.
color, you know.
Yeah.
That's the kind of same, that's the oral equivalent of what I get when I hear that sort of relaxation as it kind of spins, the music spins off into space, not
Yeah.
resolved, not finished. It's almost kind of like you're just walking away from it, but it's still going,
Yes.
you know. So yeah, I I think that's a very good place to play. If you were to just be pressed into playing the 90 seconds or whatever. Of course, there's a lot of really interesting material in the piece that you could choose from, and of course, the opening sets the tone. Um,
Yes.
so yeah. Let me see if there's. Whoops! I just I just switched screens, but now we're back. You know? Is there any? Are there any questions from our studio audience uh, for Tony? Are there any spots in the piece you'd like us to play, or like to or ask him any kind of questions? There are some other things that we'll talk to Tony about as well in our remaining time. But I'm going to monitor the chat here, and so if I see any questions pop up on the chat, hopefully the time delay won't be too great. So again,
Yeah. Yeah.
anybody welcome to ask a question, and I will try to answer the question. Okay, we do have a question from Dan Cook. Can you identify a particular element that caused the breakthrough for you? Do you attribute it solely to being enrolled in a structured graduate program?
Oh. Oh man, that's a good question. Wow. I think I got to that point of just of I should do what I feel in my soul, rather than trying to please other people. I won't go too deeply in this. I wrote a big blog about it if you want to go to my website and read it. But I had a really bad experience with my previous teacher in undergrad, and he really was he was an abusive person, and he really kind of destroyed my confidence and told me, and I really, when I was an undergraduate and I was younger and greener, and I would really try to please him because I really looked up to him and things. And he would tell me that, like for instance, when I went to him to talk about graduate school, about going to graduate schools, he asked me where I wanted to go, and I listed all the big ones, where everybody wants to go. And he looked me right in the face and he said, "Don't bother applying to those; they won't take you." And
I know who you're talking about now. So but I won't.
yeah,
We won't mention the name.
yeah. And I think I had been just so broken down, and then kind of vindicated when I did get into all those schools. Um, that by the time I had gotten there, I was just like, and I also knew I was kind of different than a lot of the other people I was going to school with. I had a
Hmm.
different past,
Hmm.
and I was like, I'm really gonna. I just was so broken down by trying to please this person,
Yeah.
and I just felt like I'm just going to do this for me. I'm going to do exactly what I want. I'm going to put all of myself in here and not worry about,
Hmm.
I was there to learn. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't like, not listening to my teacher. I was definitely there to
Right.
learn. But I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I wanted to pursue the voice that I heard,
Hmm.
in tandem with working with my teacher. And if you have a good teacher, they will do that, with you.
Yep.
And so I think that was really what did it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing more crushing than encountering a bad teacher, especially when you're in a position of vulnerability and power, that sort of power dynamic. And you're not alone. I mean, not just with this particular person of whom I know you're speaking, but this kind of dynamic, unfortunately, still exists, I'm sure, today in many places, and it can really destroy.
Yes.
I mean, maybe not physically destroy somebody's life, but it really can. It can damage. It can do damage for years and years and years.
Yes.
It can certainly get somebody out of music. That's for sure. In a hurry.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And there were
Suddenly they're going back into communications. So I
right.
mean, and the thing of it is that we all know that music schools, conservatories, maybe some of the more higher tier programs in music that aren't music schools departments, all feel in some ways that they have to gatekeep. And there are certain merits to that, to the extent that you're actually helping somebody who really, if you feel that that person genuinely doesn't have maybe the goods, it's almost irresponsible to push that person through and send them to spend all the years and money in a grad program, only to find out that they really don't have what it takes.
Right.
And by then you're 30 years old, and it's like, well, now what the fuck do I do?
Yeah.
So so there's that's the plus side of it. But the way in which it gets prosecuted, for a lack of a better term, can sometimes be really disingenuous and actually not correct. And in your case, I mean, I guess I'm saying this because I know you and you're my friend, and I've heard a lot of your music, and so I can say this, with a lot of bias. But I'm also, I know I've been doing this for a long time. I've been in music for a long time. If you were one of my students, I would never tell you that, because I know that you have an ear and you've got the drive and you've got the passion and you've got all that stuff. Like whatever you might be missing in terms of maybe some craft. I mean, craft, you can teach craft.
Right.
That's the one thing you can teach in composition lessons.
Yeah.
Craft. Yeah, don't do that because the cello can't play that.
Sure.
Right? That's easy.
Right.
Right? It's the other stuff that you can't teach, and that's the stuff you look for. So, and it's a real shame. And actually, I'm going to put a bow on this, because I want to talk about more positive things. But I will say that many times when there are teachers that say that kind of stuff to students, or are just bad teachers, they actually can't do it themselves, or they no longer can do it themselves. Now, it's not necessarily true in all cases, but there's a certain kind of that power dynamic is set up by own insecurity on the part of the of the person, right? So it's sort of like, it's real easy to tell a bunch of undergrads that they suck and make you feel better about your position because you also suck, but you suck less because you happen to have a job. So this happens, unfortunately, in a lot of places. Not every place, but it happens more often than not. Okay, so there's that. Do we have any other questions for Tony? Again, if I read your question a little later than the Facebook live. There is a delay, so feel free to ask the question. I will try to catch up and ask Tony. So actually, this is a good segue. We talked a little bit about this in the pre-show. And like, for example, the merits and demerits of going to grad programming. You went to Indiana, great school, right? One of the top music programs in the nation, top composition program. I mean, it's always in the top 15, 10, whatever, right? Depending on whose rankings you're. So you got into a great school, great teachers, great faculty, world renowned, et cetera, dot, dot, dot. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, because I know some of your, I've known you since that time, and I know some of your history. So when most people go to grad school and get PhDs or DMAs, the next logical step in that progression is usually, hey, I'm going to go find a cushy academic job somewhere, and that's it, right? I'm just like, I've pushed all the buttons, I've jumped through all the hoops, right? I passed all my comps and my all that stuff, and here I've got this great fancy piece of paper from that's embroidered with whatever university it is, and that's the obvious logical next step. So then we all go on the job market,
right?
And that was so if we spooled back to 2007, 2008, 2009, that was on your radar. You were on your radar, was that you were going to be Dr. Lanman. You are Dr. Lanman still. Your doctor hasn't changed. Good doc, yes. But you're not teaching at an institution, as you don't have a tenure track or tenured position at an institution. So, and okay. So why don't you, in your own words, say kind of a little bit about your experience post graduation and what your path to today is, and how you navigated that time, which wasn't easy. I remember. I know if sometimes it were very difficult for you. So.
Yeah, well, like back before 2007, 2008, which is when I finished, it was really different, before that first recession happened. And when I was a graduate student, I mean, at that time, I fully expected, okay, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to go be a professor at some university, and this is my path. And also, this is important, I felt like that was the path to success, and only that narrow path was success. That's kind of how I thought at the time. And it was easy, kind of, things have changed now, but it was easy at that time because pretty much everybody I knew that graduated with their doctorate, even when I was in Texas, they pretty much all got jobs in universities. And I just expected to get one myself. That was the thing. And so when I graduated right when the recession happened, and everything in higher education started to change, and all these positions started to change to adjunct faculty, or the positions were just being eliminated, right? Just one of those two things. And I did what everybody else did. I crafted my CV and applied to as many jobs as I could. And I couldn't, I mean, I have probably a folder in my computer with well over 200 letters of application to different academic jobs. And I never even got a Skype interview, like much less an in-person like finalist thing where I was brought there and taught
Mm.
classes. I
Mm.
never even got a Skype interview or a phone interview, nothing.
Mm.
Out of like more than 200 applications. And so I went through years of depression because I had this idea in my head of what success was. Success was getting the tenure track job and in a university and getting on the tenure track and teaching there for so many years, and then going on sabbatical and going to McDowell to write your opera. That was my
Right. Oh, you didn't throw the Pulitzer Prize in there, did you? That comes a little later.
right.
Right. And then right.
I never thought that, but
well,
but
that was your problem. You shot too low.
I know. But that was the idea, and because I wasn't achieving that, I really thought I was a failure. For many years I thought I was just a failure. I couldn't get a job. No one wanted to interview me. Blah blah blah. And I slowly started to realize how how fucked up of an idea that was, and how screwed up my idea of what success was. It was just such a completely narrow view of what it was to be successful. And I slowly over the years started to realize there's no shame in not having an academic job. You're not a failure. You only, and I'm not saying like you're a failure at life, but you only fail as a composer if you stop composing.
Absolutely.
That's it. That's the only.
Absolutely.
That's the only line of failure right there.
Right.
So I realized that I can work a regular job. So what I do now is I work IT for Indiana University, and that's my day job, and it does not stop me. It does not make it not possible for me to be a composer. I'm still a composer. I still compose. I still play. I still do music things,
Right.
It doesn't matter. In a lot of ways, it frees me, because this is another thing I realized about myself in those years. One, I never would have started podcasting. So that's something huge in my life that I probably never would have done if I would have gotten an academic job.
And I do want to ask you about like that specifically, your one track podcast. But anyway, continue.
Well, the other thing I realized is I don't think I'm suited to be a professor. I really don't. I mean, I don't think I'm suited to. I'm a horribly unpolitical person.
Oh, well, you and I would love to have you on. I'd love to have you by my side at some committee meetings, man. We'd have a great time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would enjoy that. I don't know if that's really my thing, and so in many ways, coming out of it on the other side, I am actually very glad for what happened. And how it happened and where it's brought me in my life. And I just think people, should definitely know that, it's an amazing experience going to graduate school, and you should go there for, to be a composer. And it doesn't matter what you do to make money, whether you're working in a university as a composer, or you're an IT person, or or you're a manager at a restaurant. It doesn't matter. What that experience does for you is it makes you a better composer. So you can spend the rest of your life being a composer.
Right.
Right. It doesn't have to be in the institution.
No. And the thing of it is, of course, you're not alone. There are, take you and then multiply you by thousands who went through that whole process and got degrees from all kinds of universities, and maybe had great letters of recommendation, had lots of great music and all that stuff, and just for whatever reasons, and we can get into all of that. It's a whole other subject. Didn't land a tenure track job, or say a more permanent job teaching, and so it's a reality that one must face. So anyone out there who is currently pursuing a PhD or a DMA in composition or thinking about it, this isn't to discourage you from that path of study. Because there are things that you get in the educational process and also the fellowship with your musicians, the fellow musicians, is and that time that you have is kind of really invaluable. It's kind of like a seasoning time, right, where you can season yourself. But that being said, and I say this to young composers, especially the ones that come to Alba, and some of them are either in grad programs or just finishing, or maybe undergrads. I say, you have to set your expectations wide. You have to have absolutely apply for the academic job if you want to teach.
Sure.
I mean, don't let that stop you from applying, right? But also be mindful of the fact that you're in competition with hundreds of other people every single job. So there's a lot of metrics that go into that. And those metrics aren't necessarily that you're bad. The metrics are a lot of other things. And just like you said, and the very good point is that one doesn't stop being a composer just because one is earning, the money to pay the rent with some other means. That's just a means to make sure you don't, make sure you survive. And I can even people who are in academia. So I'm one of the quote unquote lucky ones who has a job and I'm tenured, and that's wonderful. And I count my blessings for that for a whole lot of reasons. It's a great first world job to have. And, it really is. And I complain about it all the time, just like every one of my colleagues do. And we are the worst complainers in the world. We complain about, the parking space is 50 meters too far away from my office. It's like, meanwhile, someone in the world is actually like walking 6 miles to get fresh water. So, I mean, there's right. So, but whenever somebody asks me what I do, I never say professor first. I say composer first. I see the job the exact same way as your IT job.
Right.
I love teaching. Don't get me wrong. I actually love teaching. And there are days when I get really excited about teaching and I can be nerdy about it, especially with theory. I get all that theory nerdgasms. Sure. But that's not who I am. Who I am is I'm a composer. I'm an artist. And this job is just basically making sure that I can keep creating art.
Sure.
And I would do it whether I was teaching at Roger Williams or Harvard or, doing whatever else, right?
Yeah.
So so that's a really good realization. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the institutions tend to sell you the magic sauce. Right? They sell you the magic sauce, but they also don't do a good job of actually training you how to get the damn job. Zero. Like there's zero workshops on like, what do you do if you get the interview, what do you do? How do you write a cover letter? There's almost no actual professional training in that, which should, when you get to a doctoral position, you're really training to be a professional, not just a professional in the academic world, but also like, what about a commission contract? How do you negotiate a contract?
Oh God!
What language should be in there? How do you not get fucked by?
That was so hard for me.
Right?
Yeah. Oh man.
So there's none of that goes on, and we end up having to learn either through by the good graces of mentors who actually will pass that knowledge down, or colleagues who have just learned it the hard way and say, by the way, kid, don't do it this way. Or you just learn it the hard way. You just go,
right.
Whoops. Well, that didn't work. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I am thrilled that you are in the position that you're in right now, that you've gotten through that course and you've found, you've discovered that none of this ever took away you as a composer, and that your musical voice would never be silenced, no matter what you did. So,
Thanks.
so,
Yeah.
so speaking of which, in our remaining minutes, there's no real timer to this. It's like whatever. It's not like it's not like I have to sell. I don't have to sell ads to like Dove soap or something. Um, tell us about the One Track podcast. You've made a bit of a splash with this, and I was one of the earlier ones when you started it, but it's kind of become a thing. So first of all, what was the genesis of that, and how has that shaped your thinking or helped you? What have you learned in the process?
Well, I think that helped me, just come to the place that I'm at now. And it, you know, it made me realize something. It made me realize something extremely important, which is that if you're doing something for the love of it, and you're not worried about pushing yourself. You know, you're just doing something to help others. To help your community, because we're all in communities, and we hear that word a lot. Community, but it is so important,
right?
To be engaged with your community, and it's so important to just do selfless things for your community, and it's amazing how that comes back to you. But that's the thing, like, you can't make it about you. You can't make it, well, I'm going to do this thing,
right.
So maybe I'll get this and maybe I'll get that. It can't be about that. And everybody, you don't necessarily have to do a podcast, but everybody can do something, to benefit the community that they exist in. And you can do something to help other people in your community. And that feeling is so amazingly rewarding, in itself, that has just given me a sense of real freedom. Like when we're graduate students, I can't speak for everybody, but I know when we're graduate students and maybe, first starting out and stuff, everybody's so hungry, to get performances or commissions, and it really can become, really focused on yourself and what you want of your career and all this stuff. And it's so nice to have a part of your life where you feel like you're free of that, and you're just, concerned with other people. You're concerned with helping other people, and that just comes back on you 10 times. It's amazing. So yeah, that was a real lesson that I learned from doing One Track, and that was sort of my my goal, for doing One Track. Like, this is going to be something that's not about me at all. It's about these people. It's about doing something for them, and it's not about asking them anything. Like, after the podcast is over, I'm not sitting here like, hey, I have this piece, do you want to look at it or whatever? I never ever do that. Because it's just not what it's about.
That's that's a definition of how to be an asshole 101.
Yes, absolutely. And then also, if you're doing that stuff, people can see through it, and whatever you're doing is not really going to last. It's not really going to have a life, if that's what you're doing. But so yeah, that was a big lesson, that I'm still taking with me.
What's the future of the One Track podcast? I mean, it's going strong.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I'm it's funny, speaking of that, I just went through this thing where I was offered a sponsorship. So there's never been a sponsor for One Track, and I won't say who it was, and anyway, I don't feel badly about it. I don't think they're a bad company. I think they're a great company. I think what they produce is great. I think the people there are great. But what ended up happening was that they wanted to give me a free copy of their software, and that was sort of the sponsorship.
Okay.
And not give anything to the listeners, and they gave me like one of those links, like your link is like, tell them to go to this /one track podcast. And so I emailed them and I was like, I'm a little unclear why they're going to this link. Because if they go to this link, do they get a percentage off, or do they, that's what I'm concerned
like
about.
A discount code or something, right? Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Something like for the audience, and that's a sponsorship, of the podcast. And they're like, well, no, we're just using it for tracking purposes. I'm like, okay. And so I'm like, okay, so I'm going to make my audience sit through an ad spot at the beginning of the podcast, at the end of the podcast, so I can have a free program like that. No.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So I turned it down. I was like, I would love to work with you guys in the future, but this really isn't a sponsorship and I don't feel good about it. And, I turned it down, and you have to be, when you do something that gets more popular and stuff, and gets more listeners and gets more notoriety, you have to be careful of stuff like that, because it's awesome to get free stuff, but you have to really ask yourself, why am I doing this? And is it really benefiting
yeah, no lunch is ever free, right? I mean, that's ultimately
right.
Yeah. And especially like like in your case, obviously the sponsor or the potential sponsor saw, they say, oh, hey, One Track Podcast has got a following, right? This is going to reach a potential target audience, so et cetera, right? And this is the kind of thing that can always happen whenever one has a say a YouTube channel or a podcast or whatever it might be that starts to actually take off, and then the potential sponsorships come in, and then the question is well, okay, it's capitalism, I totally understand that, but what's the give and take here? And you were being very socially responsible by saying, hey, I'm not gonna just peddle the product so I can have it, and then my listeners aren't even going to get a benefit from it.
Right.
And that's, like you said, that's not a sponsorship. Usually if it's a sponsorship, there's a code, enter in, Tony Lanman, 203, and that gives you, 15% off on your next purchase or whatever it might be, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so that was, I don't know, that was just something that happened within the last couple of weeks. I just thought was interesting. And as far as like the future of the podcast, I'm just going to keep doing it as long as I can. I'm going to keep trying to get, really, it's always cool when I get really well-known people, but I really love just talking to anybody. And really, I just want to talk to anybody that's, that's doing it, that's out there and they are doing it. And whatever their position is, or whatever, they're doing it, and they're really doing it in the community. I want to talk to them. So
I think it's great, man, and I always enjoy listening to it. I don't always catch every episode, but of course you can go back and before you leave, and I will also leave a link in the in the when this gets published to Facebook as a kind of a video, I'll throw some links in there, but it's a onetrackpodcast.com, or wait, what is it? What is the link?
That's
is that
it. That's it. It's One Track Podcast with the number 1. So onetrackpodcast.com.
Yeah. It's great. And it was a lot of fun for me to be on when I got on, and you got to ask me all the hard questions and made me pick some small amount of music. And, I cheated a little bit, right? Cause I said, oh, here's this 35-minute piece, but we can play excerpts. Right?
Well, yeah, but that's how I think of it. I mean, it's like, one piece equals one track if it's multi-movement or whatever. And we've done whole operas, on there at this point. That first season, I like that first season because for the most part, that season was just like my friends.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you start something, right? For you just start it with friends usually, or people you
Right.
know well, and
Right.
so that first season was, yeah, mostly just people that were my friends. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those are fun. They can go in any direction because they're your friends and they
Yes.
know you well.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, it's 8:25 according to my clock. I'm going to throw out the possibility for any other questions for Tony while we have him on the horn. Again, there will be a little bit of a delay, so we'll fill up some space if there's any questions. Um, Facebook isn't, again, it's not as responsive as YouTube is, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Are you oh, I forgot to ask you, this show,
yes.
the name of the show, what are you drinking?
Oh yes. So first of all, obviously the name is a riff on the Seinfeld thing, right?
Yes.
So we're all at home. I am drinking and I've been onto these for like the last 2 weeks. This is a Negroni. Do you know what that is, Tony?
I don't know what's in it. No.
Okay, it's an Italian beverage. It's a northern Italian beverage, and it has 1 part Campari, 1 part gin, and 1 part vermouth, red vermouth.
Oh, okay.
And then usually it's topped with you can top it with some sparkling water or something of whatever, and with ice and a slice of orange. So I've got actually a slice of blood orange in here because
Nice.
Campari is kind of almost like a blood orange liqueur, but it's not really. There's like a lot of herbs and things of that. It's a bitter liqueur,
Yeah.
but it's nice. And I've been sort of on this homage to Italy with making some Aperol spritz and Negronis because of the COVID virus. This year's ALBA program and composition program and my
Right.
study abroad programs, I mean, they're on the they're gone. I mean, technically the ALBA program hasn't been officially canceled, but I currently can't see any way that it's gonna,
Right.
if not for the end of May at least.
Right. Right.
So anyway, I've been bringing Italy home.
Yeah.
So
That sounds good.
what are you drinking? I noticed you've taken a few
Oh
sips.
yes. I'm drinking a Laphroaig.
Okay.
It is it's a whiskey,
Okay.
single malt, very smoky, and I'm drinking it out of this, this cup.
Very cool. All
I'm
right.
just drinking it pretty much straight up. So
Is that like a teacup? Is that a Japanese teacup?
yes.
Okay. So it's not. So you're not drinking tea.
No.
Okay, good. Anyway, it looks like we don't have any questions that are coming in. So I think with that, I first of all would like to thank you very, very, very much for taking some time out of your Friday evening to join me here on this first episode of Composers at Home, maybe drinking coffee. I don't know where this will go.
This was great, man. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. You like I said earlier, you were at the top of the list, and when my production value, if this happens to grow and I do a lot more of these, I'm sure my production values will increase. So I'll have you back for a more shinier, fancier version.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
Maybe with like cut scenes and whatever. It might be on YouTube with thousands of subscribers. Right now, I only have like 150 subscribers on YouTube. So I mean, you got to start.
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, all right, man, Tony, thank you so much. It was great pleasure. I'm going to cue some outro music, and it will be your music. So if anybody joined late, you'll get to hear a little bit of the piece that we were checking out earlier. And thank you very much. For future episodes, I plan to do one a week. I'm going to do another episode. It'll be either next Friday or next Thursday. The guest to be determined. I will try to post that a little sooner than I did today. I thank you everyone for joining on tonight, and stay tuned for more details. And I will also post some links to Tony's website, the One Track Podcast, and anything else that he would like to share with you. So great. Thank you so much, Tony. I wish you a good night, sir, and we will
Thank you.
we will talk soon.
Okay.
Great.